Yeah.
Thank you, Twinette. Are there announcements to be made this morning?
I might just report that several of us met with Steve Mills at the West Newton Cemetery, and some of us went to the monument company, and we are real close to having a more definite agreement on how much the cost of the monument and when to begin. We told Steve we thought it was time to go ahead and pay the cemetery for the plots and get this going. So we'll have a more complete report at monthly meeting.
Joys and concerns to share?
Well, again, I
Well,
will say we've had a joyful week full of family get-togethers and visiting with friends related to the West Newton community, and have seen and heard from and been with some dear friends, and we've had a heart full of joyful experiences this week with my family who comes from 5 different states.
Hmm.
school started for Decatur, and I took Drake to school the first day, and it's like, wow, I'm winding up my time delivering him. I took him to kindergarten and have taken him to school on all his first days. So pretty soon he'll be driving and he won't need me to chauffeur him anymore.
So we had a wonderful week taking care of these little ones right here. You don't get to, well, we can't hardly, at our age, we can't hardly handle a 3 and a 5-year-old more than 2 days. But we had a great time. We were exhausted
That's
when we were done.
It's amazing how they can fight over one Lego.
What a fun and busy week. Got to see Chip and all my Indiana kids. That was fun. And my social secretary, as I call her, Linda, my sister, uh, we ended up going to 3 different concerts this week. Um, said after years of kind of not doing anything because Nancy was too ill, I'm in a flurry of activity, but one of them ended up very special. There's a jazz pop singer that I like named Kat Edmondson. And every time I tried to see her in Indianapolis, something happened. And the biggest one was we had tickets, and then Nancy had her stroke the day before, so we didn't get to. And then later, when she came back again, I couldn't do it. And we'd corresponded a little bit over the years. And so this time, I took my sisters who live here, my brother-in-law, and we all went to see her. She was in the little town of Marysville, just up the road in a beautifully restored uh, art center, movie theater. And I had requested that she sing. She wrote a song about her mother dying that came out the same day that Nancy died. It's called The Worst Day. And so I requested it, and she did indeed sing it. And it kind of made me verklempt. But afterwards, I decided, well, I will see if I can meet her. And I walked up and she goes, "You're Brent." I said, "Yes, I am." And she goes, "I know you wanted that song sung." And we ended up chatting for about 10 or 15 minutes. She was very kind. And then I got an email from her the next day that they were in Massachusetts and she sang that song. And she said, I thought of you and Nancy when I sang it. And it was just for a stranger to be so personable. It was just a blessing. So it was really a joy. There's so much goodness in this world. Well, let's rejoice with the good that we can share with each other, including being in worship with each other today. And hold all the concerns in our hearts and share them and lift them to God and go into some silence. And Jonathan's our worship leader, and he will speak out of the silence as he feels led.
So hopefully my internet connection will cooperate this morning. It's been in and out, so hopefully if I cut out, I'll have an emerging backup plan that hasn't emerged yet. So all Bible quotes in my message are taken from the New International Version of the Bible. And the title of my message is, We Need to Talk About Performative Religion. Recently, I've found myself thinking quite a bit about performative religion, particularly in the case of Christianity. We all know what performative religion is, even if we don't know that we know. In short, performative religion refers to outward, often public, demonstrations of faith that are aimed at garnering attention for those engaging in them, promoting the idea that the individual or individuals are moral and devout. The forms of performative religion are many, and we've all seen them. At their best, they can be expressions of spirituality in which people of faith engage in a very genuine way. Examples include posting Bible verses on social media, wearing religiously themed t-shirts, or putting religiously themed bumper stickers on vehicles. None of these things are negative in and of themselves, and may be motivated by heartfelt faith. However, at their worst and most performative, these expressions can be hollow, driven by pride and a desire to elevate the individual's sense of uprightness in the eyes of their community and perhaps themselves. Darker still are the motivations that often lie behind collective public forms of performative religion. When I was a senior in high school, a Kentucky-wide debate broke out over whether the Ten Commandments should be posted in public schools and courthouses. Seemingly overnight, bumper stickers and yard signs reading, "I support the Ten Commandments," began to appear. Both individuals and entire church congregations boarded the bandwagon to show their support for posting the Decalogue in the Commonwealth's public institutions dedicated to education and justice. Ironically, we would eventually come to learn that the overwhelming majority of the churches speaking out so forcefully in favor of this cause, in fact, didn't have the Ten Commandments posted within their own hallowed walls. The reason I recount this now 25-year-old episode in Kentucky history is because I was vividly reminded of it recently. I won't discuss in detail why this was so. Instead, I will encourage listeners to explore for themselves recent headlines involving the Oklahoma State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Doing so should prove instructive indeed, where this morning's topic is concerned. But why talk about this at all in the context of a Quaker meeting for worship? My answer to that question is simple. Performative religion is a malady that particularly afflicts modern American Christianity. This occurs in sinister ways, which are contributing to the emptying of pews, particularly of younger people, and for that matter, of most people who lack an appetite for overt, often ecclesiastically endorsed hypocrisy. Many of the same voices lifted today in the most public condemnation of the LGBT community, of progressive political viewpoints, of undocumented immigrants, and basically anyone and anything not aligned with a right-wing extremist agenda, are doing so from the comfort of their pulpits. These voices invoke their faith as a basis for supporting political candidates and ideologies that any reasonable person would recognize as being in conflict with the teachings of Jesus Christ. These voices invoke their faith quite publicly as a basis for their businesses denying services to groups with which they may disagree. They invoke their faith as the basis for very public displays of prayer at the sporting events of equally public schools. Are those engaging in these behaviors genuinely people of faith? Maybe, maybe not. But what many of them certainly are people taking to courtrooms, news programs, social media, and our shared public spaces to express very publicly and loudly that they regard the United States of America as having been founded on the Christian faith, at least their interpretation of the Christian faith. This matters in no small part because we're now living in a reality in which the highest court in the land is increasingly demonstrating itself to be friendly to the erosion of the wall of separation between church and state. We can
Well, let's worship in silence for what there's Jonathan back.
I think I'm back. Thanks to the glories of the hotspot, I should be reconnected. I'll resume where I think approximately I left off. This matters in no small part because we're now living in a reality in which the highest court in the land is increasingly demonstrating itself to be friendly to the erosion of the wall of separation between church and state. We can reference the most recent Supreme Court term as evidence of this. There are very real-world consequences to legal and legislative actions pursued behind a guise of performative religion. Lest I seem too self-righteous, I will sound a note of caution. A very thin line must be walked when calling out the dark side of performative religion. In confronting the practice, and yes, in the case of public and or elected officials, the practitioners of performative religion, we must guard against falling into a similar trap. Opposition to performative religion can itself become performative, a kind of virtue signaling aimed at achieving some of the same aims discussed above. But I believe that it's possible, and I would go so far as to say essential, that people of faith confront nefarious efforts to weaponize and legislate into law the beliefs, doctrines, and or dogmas of any religious tradition or traditions. Performative religion is too often the public face of this effort, a cynical and manipulative effort. I believe that it's possible to stand in opposition to this effort without succumbing to an equally dangerous self-righteousness. In opposing the dangers of performative religion, we would be in good company, that of Jesus of Nazareth, no less. During his earthly ministry, Christ confronted and was confronted by a religious establishment that rested on a foundation of performative religion. The two dominant sects of Judaism of the day, the Pharisees and Sadducees, were both parts of this religious and social structure which maintained power through various means, one of which was the enactment of very public acts of religious devotion. To this day, the term Pharisaical is used in the English language to denote behavior that is hypocritically and typically publicly pious. Jesus tells us of the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 23, verses 5 through 7. Everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called Rabbi by others. And in verses 13 through 14, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. In verses 23 through 24, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. Returning to my earlier example of the push to post the Ten Commandments in public spaces, you will note the fervor with which folks seem to promote the public display of this list of thou shalt nots provided to us via Moses. Yet I can't recall ever encountering a strong push for the posting of, say, the Sermon on the Mount in public spaces. Strange, considering that the teachings contained therein come directly to us from the Savior, who we're told in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 3, has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, as much more glory as the builder of a house has more honor than the house itself. Admittedly, the Sermon on the Mount does get complicated quickly. Rather than a list of straightforward thou shalt nots, Christ presents us with such society-shaking teachings as those found in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Should a society find itself genuinely interested in the pursuit of truth, interested in, for example, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it could do no better than to take the above as guidance. Although meekness might serve in such a society to prevent ostentatious displays of religious texts in public spaces. Quakers have a long history of advocating for religious liberty and the fair and equal treatment of all. But I wonder if the Religious Society of Friends isn't failing to meet the present moment in terms of confronting the very real dangers of performative religion. I feel led to say that friends are too often choosing to be nice, to be accommodating, frankly, to be safely ecumenical, rather than choosing to speak hard truths to other Christian groups who have embraced what I can only refer to as a corruption of the teachings of Jesus Christ. Theirs is a Pharisaical form of religion that elevates the law over the spirit of the law, that condemns the least among us, that celebrates the most vulgar and morally bankrupt public figures to a cult-like extent. A form of religion that seeks to legislate itself so as to silence dissent and control those who would oppose it. Speaking for myself, I would encourage all friends across the branches of our religious society to unequivocally, openly, and vocally condemn the messaging of religious groups which are calling for our collective march into Christian nationalism. A march which is so often concealed behind a facade of performative religion. I feel strongly convinced that as Quakers, we are called to be among those who will stand in opposition to the darkening of the day, to live out our calling as children of the light.
Thank you, Jonathan and Twinette, for your ministry offerings this morning. We'll now continue with program worship for those who can stay. And for those who must leave, we wish you God's blessing on the week and hope to see you next week.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Jonathan and Twinette. Jonathan, that was an excellent message.
As I was listening to Jonathan's message, I was thinking about my friend Bill Roman, a Lutheran pastor who I met as a freshman in college, and we've been friends ever since. And we were talking a few years ago over lunch, and we are talking about sermons of all things. And one of these things he said he always tries to do is to do a what, and then so what? How's that apply to us? And the last, no, now what? So I'm now sitting, I've heard the what and the so what. Now I'm living into and contemplating the now what thing, both for me and my voice, but also perhaps our meeting as a collective voice. If friends' hearts are clear, we can close meeting for worship.
Mine's clear.
Not so